Thank you, Kyle, Mark, Graham, for doing this quarterly review of Glass House, your earnings. I really appreciate it. Before we dive in, I want to just provide some disclosures for anyone who's watching or listening. I do not work for Glass House. I have not been compensated by the company, except for whenever I take a tour, I get a goodie bag of some great cannabis and some wonderful plus gummies. I also want to just give a disclosure that I'm recovering from a very vicious cold that is not COVID. So if I cough or I struggle a little, I told everyone here that I'm playing hurt today. I'm doing my best. Also, I'm wrong a lot. Please do your own due diligence. Please do not rely on my opinions. I have strong, passionate opinions, and sometimes I am wrong. So please do not rely on it. Please do your own research. I am an investor in Glass House. I find it very fascinating. I've been bullish for a while, but please do your own due diligence. Before we start, I kind of always start with my thesis for Glass House and why we review every quarter and why I find it so fascinating. And it's that Glass House is doing something that never really has been done before. If you think about the cannabis industry before 2017, as a society, we have never grown cannabis at scale. Then the Canadians tried to do it and blew up spectacularly. And multiple large cannabis companies have tried it to varying degrees of success. And the only successful ones that kind of remain are ones that are in protected, what are called limited license markets that have what I consider kind of artificially high cannabis pricing. And so it allows you a margin of error and just a higher sales price than would happen if there was competition everywhere. What Glass House is doing is trying to grow the best quality cannabis you can grow for the lowest cost in what I consider God's gift to the environment, which is they started in Santa Barbara County, but then moved to actually what's better for growing plants, which is Ventura County, specifically Camarillo, California. And they have what I believe is a unicorn facility. Competitor has called it the Farrar of greenhouses, that I think is an irreplaceable asset that allows Glass House to produce the type of quality flower at a cost that cannot be touched. A competitor to Glass House just reported earnings very close to Glass House, and they have a greenhouse in Monterey County, and they reported a negative 7% gross margin in the same quarter that Glass House reported an overall 54% gross margin, and then specifically in cultivation announced a 60% gross margin. As an investor, I have rarely seen such a cost advantage. And what's remarkable is that Glass House is doing this at $550, $500, $600 flower, when in other parts of the country it sells for $1,800, $2,000, $3,000 a pound. And most importantly, they're only using 20% of their operating capacity. And so we'll dive into this quarter and why it's important, but Glass House is starting to show us what's capable in this facility. And not only are they producing the cannabis for a great price, but they're selling out of it. So anyway, and the big thing is once they can turn it all on and when cannabis can cross state lines, I think this company could produce enormous amounts of free cash flow. And in my own model, I believe they could produce at least $2 a share in free cash flow, which just kind of shows the upside for a stock that is, at least close to $5 a share. So with all of that said, thank you guys. Congratulations. I think this is your best quarter and gave us a snapshot of what you could do. And I really appreciate it. But instead of heaping praise on you, I want to focus and gain more understanding, just more like on the negative side. I want to step right in and say, okay, you reduced your guidance for Q4. You had an excellent Q3. You reduced your guidance for Q4 because of weather. And what I want to understand is what happened in Q4. And this is kind of the second Q4 in a row where there's been some weather issues that have surprised you. And I want to understand that. And I also want to understand, should we just have lower Q4 expectations going forward because of the time of the year?
So before I turn that directly over to Graham for him to give sort of the greenhouse analysis, I just want to thank you. You've consistently not only followed us, but asked all the right investor questions. You text us, call us. What a lot of the folks don't realize is just how dogged you are about your research. If they knew that we got at least one text a week from you, calls from you, visits from you, which I'm saying, if I'm reading your reports, I respect the fact that you are actually working hard to get your shoes dirty. So we appreciate that as a longtime investor. I give you a tip of the cap. All of that said, please let me hand that question to Graham about the last two.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was thinking, I think you might be the investor who's visited the SoCal farm the most. I'm not sure if anybody else has actually come down there with their own feet and eyes to see the progress and how things are going. So Kyle has a great.
It's so much fun. I watch. There's something new every
spot.
Time.
Yeah, it is a special spot. So a handful of questions there. I think maybe I'll take them in reverse order. And the going backwards.
Graham, it's not freaking Jeopardy, buddy.
It's I don't think there's nothing inherent about Q4 that is broken. Now, Q3 is probably our sweet spot quarter, but Q4 should be very close behind it. There was an issue last year. They're actually very different issues, so I'm going to put it in kind of the coincidence bucket. Last year, what the issue was is that we had, and it actually happened earlier. It actually happened in Q3, but you felt the effects of it in Q4. Was we had a highest ever recorded in the history books heat wave. It was 113 degrees or something like that. Greenhouses, they don't call them hot houses for nothing. And one of the things they're very good at is capturing solar radiation and warming things up. But then you put it with 113 degrees, and that's the last thing you want. And in that case, we actually, we found very specific things. We have these things called wet walls, which is how we cool and humidify the greenhouse. Our greenhouses are Kubo Ultra Climas, which are specifically designed for what we have here in Camarillo, which is, they call them Santa Anas, which is a hot, dry wind. And it's actually very difficult for most greenhouses to deal with because the way that you keep your humidity in normal greenhouses, you close your vents. But if you do that, and the temperature goes up. And what the Kubos are really good at, and what they're really optimized for, is it's hot and dry outside, where these wet walls and the positive pressure and the ability to recirculate allow you to use that evaporative cooling to drop the temperature, raise the humidity, and you can then recirculate the air so you can keep that humidity inside. What we found last year was our wet walls hadn't been changed in 20 years. We were brand new to the facility and didn't know that until we needed everything they could give us. The drippers were clogged, and when we went to flip those things on when we needed them the most, we got probably 20 or 30, 20% of the performance. Those are all new. They're replaced. We learned the settings in the greenhouse and how to do it. So if that hit us again, I wouldn't say we wouldn't notice it, but I don't think we'd be on a call talking about it. This year was actually different. It was a combination really of hot, or I'll say warm, humid, and cloudy. And a couple notes, because I saw some of the questions. We had a good exchange on Twitter. One thing I think people maybe don't realize is the cannabis that we're selling today started its life as a mother plant in March. So it's not so much about was the weather in November good so far, it's what's the weather over the last 6 months, and in particular since, call it August, September. And the conditions we had there are actually very tough conditions for a greenhouse, which is it's warm, it's humid, and the light's low. If it's humid and cold, it's actually, this is going to be greenhouse geeky, so I hope you don't mind the long answer. If it's humid and cool, you're not that bad off because you can raise the temperature. And you get two things that happen. One is that drops the relative humidity. That's when it says relative humidity, it means relative to temperature. So higher temperature is lower humidity. The other thing is you get condensation in a greenhouse when you have a differential between cold air outside and warm air inside. It's actually the primary way that we pull humidity out of the air in a greenhouse. But if it's warm and humid, then you have to heat even more. If it's warm and humid and sunny, that's not horrible, because as the light levels go up, the plants can kind of absorb a warmer temperature. But if you got overcast days, it's 20 degrees C outside and it's 100% humidity, you get stuck kind of in a box where you don't want to get too hot, but that means you can't drop the humidity and you're already too warm outside, and it gets really hard to take the humidity out, which becomes ripe for diseases, forces us sometimes to harvest early. And what you actually saw is less a reduction in the total weight and more a shift in the mix between flower, smalls, and trim. And if you think about that, you know, for easy math, flower $600, smalls are $400, and trim's $25. Even with the same number of harvested pounds, if 5% of the product moves from being flower to being trim, you actually lose quite a bit, and from a average selling price or revenue point of view. And that's what we dealt with. Certainly not saying that it's the only thing. A healthier plant, a more consistent plant, all helps. The challenging weather just exacerbates it. It's kind of like, if you getting on an airplane doesn't make you sick, but if you get on an airplane and you got a bad night's sleep the night before, then the combination of those things can make you sick. And we learned a lot from it, I think. And so, kind of counterintuitively, it's the anomaly situations that teach you lessons. And we've either made, are in the process of making, or doing research on changes that I think would better help us deal with the exact same conditions in the future.
Great. I know that's really helpful. I mean, one of the things that I just preach over and over is the big myth of cannabis is that it's easy. Cultivation is easy. And I think discussions like this actually are quite helpful to investors, because you just realize some of these nuances, some of these importance, like I didn't even know before this, that like the difference between having humid and cold, or hot and humid, and this specific greenhouse and this location and what happens. And then there's another nuance that you mentioned, I think it's just really, really important. I think confuses a lot of investors. And Mark, I think you've done a good job of explaining this before. And guys, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the more robust the plant, the greater there is flower as a percentage of the plant. So even if flower prices stay the same, the biomass pricing that you report will be higher.
Yeah.
And so if you have to early harvest because things are a little too humid or hot and you have to protect the plants, you're going to have less flower as a percentage of the plant. So your average selling price will be down, even if flower prices are the same.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think it's, at least on, what we're guiding to is not a significant change in the number of pounds. It's really a change more in how that biomass is split up between the three different categories.
Gotcha. It's very helpful. Does
and also, I guess, and worth pointing out too, I know we mentioned it before, which is even with that, worth, I think, noting that versus Q4 last year, what we're guiding to this year is something like a 30% improvement. So significant improvement from last year, large double digits, and we think we can do better in the future, which is, I think a positive position to be in.
No, for sure. Does any of the lowering of Q4's guidance change your confidence or your forecast for production for 2024?
I don't really see it as a change in production. I mean, my general assumption is that we will be better tomorrow than we were yesterday, as particularly over time. It doesn't mean every single day is your best day, but you should generally improve operations with experience. So we've done a number, let's see what's a good example. We have movable curtains now in the nursery that we never had before. That allows us to better take advantage of the sun when it's there, shade when you need it. We're currently installing LED lights in our clone domes, which allows us to have more consistent plants to start their whole life cycle. We learned from this and are incorporating those learnings in our phase 2 expansion, where two things, movable curtains again, would have helped us quite a bit, because you could have all the sun in the morning and then shade in the afternoon when the fog burned off and you wanted to tamp down the heat. And we're moving from a 3 gutter system to a 2 gutter system, same number of plants, but we should get significantly better airflow, which again would help with us. So a lot of these things that we're doing are lessons learned. And I think it's worth noting, we sold our first pound right at the end of June of last year. So what's that, 16 months or something like that total experience at this site. Is still pretty early in the life cycle of optimizing a greenhouse.
And this is just another, I watch enough cannabis companies. The fact that you've turned this on time, on budget, and that you're just producing at the level that you're at with no significant delays or no massive cost overruns is just a miracle, because it just feels like very few companies are able to accomplish that. So hat off. And that moves to my next question is, it looks like Greenhouse 5 is on track. Are you still expecting it to cost $10 to $12 million? Is there any significant change to the CapEx forecast?
No, not really. It's moving along. We're always trying to do everything as quick as we can, but it's it's on our schedule. And I think the advantages that we have there. There's some challenges. Well, now we're expanding and operating. That's a first for us. But the advantages are it's 100 foot away, almost carbon copy of the greenhouse that we retrofit first and that we're currently operating. So we get, we're doing it for the second time and get to incorporate some learnings. And then B, from the forecasting side, we were forecasting off of best guesses, and now we're forecasting off of actuals from a greenhouse 100 feet away. So both of those things should be advantages we can leverage this time around.
And Mark, last time, I think it was last quarter, but it might have been 2 quarters ago, I asked you the question of what would be the estimate to fully build out all the greenhouses. And I wonder if you have any update. I know that the greenhouse after Greenhouse 5 has lighting inside, so it'll probably cost more. But do you have an updated estimate, like magic wand, let's build out all the greenhouses, what it would cost?
So, as I say, like the next greenhouse in the plan would be Greenhouse 2, the one with supplemental lighting. And with lights, which we hope we could get financed as part of the package, it's probably in the $20-ish million range. Depending on some of the other things we may want to do in the greenhouse, it could be more, because it has the lights, but it doesn't have the same positive pressure. So depending on how we might want to do that, the price tag could go up. And then again, I think from that, we would use the experience to determine how we would build out Greenhouse 3 and Greenhouse 4. We've kind of said it would be, when we first took on the project, around $90 to $100 million in total CapEx. We're probably a little higher than that now, but not significantly higher than that.
Of the total when you took it over,
the total facility, because
and how much have you spent so far? Is around 40, right?
When we're done with Greenhouse 5, and then we've also expanded the other half of the nursery. So for people who've been seeing this, Greenhouse 1, our nursery is basically halfway, and we're expanding the other half. We're probably, I'm going to say 45 million, about halfway. And if you think about that, you've done 1 greenhouse as a nursery, 2 greenhouses, you've got 3 greenhouses left. We've built out, we put a drying, a state-of-the-art processing center in there, the distribution center, and a lot of the build. So I'd still say we're pretty much on track to that number, maybe a tad higher. But again, I think we may want to do some things to greenhouse 3 and 4 that, I don't think they have positive pressure. We may want to do that. The beauty of having supplemental lights is you get higher yields and you get it year round. So we might consider putting those in one of those greenhouses as well.
So this is an important point. I wanted to highlight, thank you for bringing it up, Mark, about positive pressure. I have made the point, and it's now clear just by comparing that this greenhouse is very different than other greenhouses. Just one example. Can you explain the importance of positive pressure, Graham, and why you would want to put it in, or why not?
Yeah, so there's a number of advantages to it. As I mentioned, one of the things that it's really good at is dealing with the Santa Ana conditions that can be prevalent in this area where you have hot and dry, and it allows you the ability to add humidity and cool and keep that humidity in. It also allows you to have a more uniform climate because you have almost a plenum of air that comes up from these tubes underneath, so it keeps it very consistent. Also in cannabis in a greenhouse, so that we can harvest 5+ times, 6 times a year. You need blackout in the summer, as there's a curtain. You put the cannabis in basically a black box to block the sun off, and makes it even harder when you have those warm, humid conditions. Is now you got to wrap the thing in a blanket, where the positive pressure helps quite a bit because it keeps the climate active in there and blows the moisture, humidity away from the canopy. And I think it's a good point. We have 3 greenhouses, and they run the spectrum from light climate controls to nice climate to the amazing climate controls of the ultra clima. And if you look into it, there's a significant difference. Our crown jewel down in SoCal, it brings the averages of everything that we do up, and that's thankfully that's exactly where we're investing and expanding. So as we go forward and that becomes a bigger and bigger component of what we do, it will, I think, tend to bring photo results upwards as well, because that's the one that is really the unicorn, and that's the one that's getting bigger.
Shifting to capital, Kyle, when do you think you'll close the preferred equity round of financing? Just for full disclosure, I participated in the preferred equity, just as a disclosure.
So we're just collecting the last bit, and I would say, with announcements and everything, I would say that's coming imminently. But it's done. For all intents and purposes, it's done.
Gotcha. And when I look forward, one question that was on people's minds is, obviously you have the potential that you would turn on additional greenhouses. How are you thinking about capital, and do you see any need to raise capital in 2024?
So there are a couple of good things happening in 2024. One, our $50 million of debt gets paid down by about $7 million in 2024 because our IO is over. So now we're starting to attack our debt. So that's going to happen, number one, next year. So I'm really excited about that. Number two, there is a strong feeling, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about it later. I'm guessing you're going to ask about Schedule 3 and our thought of that. Should that happen, that would have saved us about $10 million in tax this year. With Greenhouse 5 coming on, add more. So had we not had 280E, we wouldn't have done this last raise. So I'm not ready to commit that we won't. I don't want to, but if that's what it took to turn on another greenhouse, if the numbers are anywhere close to where they are today, it's still a no-brainer. But I'm hopeful that with some of the coming changes, that we can just use cash flow at the same time that we're paying off our debt.
Well, thank you for sharing. You jumped the gun. I might as well go there anyway. In terms of what are your expectations for Schedule 3 timing? What are you hearing?
Yeah, let me, like you started the this segment with, I've been wrong in the past. Like every single time I thought the federal government might do something, because they've done absolutely nothing. I mean, when I say nothing, nothing good. So, so all of that said, I think that everybody, no matter who your candidate or party is, or if you're an American, you see that this is likely going to be a very close presidential election. And while this is probably not a top 3 issue, it's probably a top 10 issue, cannabis legalization. And so this is an easy bone to throw. And the big thing is 280E, and also it's admitting publicly by the government that there is a medicinal use for cannabis. And so we take that as a huge positive. I think it's likely that it wouldn't surprise me to see some before the end of the year, but it's more likely early next year, and implementation would be somewhere probably towards the middle. So, that's kind of where nothing moves quickly with federal government, but things seem to be going, and everything I'm hearing is very optimistic. And a close presidential race means that you sort of pull out all the stops to do whatever you can do.
And I mean, thank you for providing that figure. I mean, that 10 million obviously is a big number, and it would obviously be even greater when you turn on your next greenhouse. That would definitely improve. My sense is the same timing. Just when I think about things, I think there was an important story. I interviewed Howard Sklamberg, who used to be the former FDA deputy commissioner and the chair of the marijuana working committee at the FDA. And, I just got lucky on timing. I asked him like, hey, what's going to happen? And he was like, oh, HHS is going to recommend Schedule 3. And then a week later, they did it. The reason I mentioned that is that he just came out, I think it was last week, and said that he would be shocked if it didn't happen, if the DEA didn't approve it. And he specifically said he expected a final rule, I think he said by next summer. And so if you back into the process that has to happen from the DEA, you're looking at like either end of the year, beginning of the year, some interim ruling, and then follows along. So I agree. I wanted to shift. Speaking, related to this is, Mark, how are you thinking about the operating expenses side per pound as you ramp up the greenhouses? Now, we can see from the gross profit and EBITDA how there isn't that much in terms of operating expenses, but how do you think about it? It's very clear you guys are going to hit your target of $100 a pound. How about the OpEx side?
So the good news, right, and I've said this for a couple of quarters, is the wholesale business from an operating expense is extremely efficient, right? We don't have the same level of marketing expenses that you do to support retail or you do CPG. You don't have the same number of people on the sales team. So we should be able to continue to leverage or get high leverage from an operating expense side. And just, if you pull out and you look at how we disclose our operating expenses, and you pull out the non-cash items, particularly you pull out the stock comp, you pull out the depreciation, you pull out the impairment. Our numbers in 2023 are only up slightly versus 2022. And you look at how much revenue has grown, that's allowed us to basically flow all the gross margin improvement right to the bottom line. And I would expect us to continue to be able to do that in 2024 with only minimal increases on operating expenses to support Greenhouse 5 as it comes on board. So don't expect a very small incremental increase in expenses next year to support Greenhouse 5.
And Graham, how about you turning on Greenhouse 5? How would you describe demand how confident are you that you can sell what you produce? Because we know you can produce it now, and you sold what you can produce, but we're about to see a step function.
Yeah.
What is demand like?
I've got a saying: crops aren't grown, they're sold. If you don't sell it, it doesn't matter if you grow it. You actually wish you hadn't. So that's the right question to ask. Obviously, we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't think we could sell it. I can tell you the word that our VP of Sales used today for the inventory they have to sell right now is hand to mouth. So they're selling it. They wish they had more inventory on the shelves, which is exactly what you want to grow into. I think that the easiest way to simplest first principle way to quantify it is supply and demand, right? California's largest cannabis market on the planet. Even with all the challenges, it's doing $5 billion or so a year. Whenever you see numbers that make it look like the California market's down, it's always almost or exclusively price, right? So it's price compression, which net is actually a good thing for the consumer. It's not unit volume, right? So on a unit basis, consumption is essentially flat, and new people are finding the market. So there's no demand destruction going on. Consumption is there, and then since last June, you've seen 40% of the cultivation licenses not renew. So you've got basically consistent demand with 40% less supply. If you look at what happened last month, I think it was 52 licenses. Mark will correct me if I'm wrong, that left in October. Our new greenhouse brings on 80. So if 52 licenses left in October and another 52 leave in November, and we're not going to sell, there's going to be 200 licenses gone before we add 80 back, right? So as we sit here today, we're about 2% maybe of the licenses in California, even with the reductions, they're still only about 2%. So what we're seeing is we can sell it as faster than we can grow it, and there's still supply leaving. So I think we feel pretty confident that turning this on and will allow us to keep doing what we've been doing.
And so how do you see that affecting prices? I'm hearing prices are relatively firm, which you should be seeing some impact from Croptober. And there's been some surprise at that, but it shouldn't be surprising watching all the licensing data. What are you seeing in pricing?
I think firm's a good word. We're kind of early into the Croptober, especially this year. Again, the weather affects people, everyone, not just us. So I think a little bit later harvest. I've heard some anecdotal reports of farms already being sold out. I think there's a lot less flower out there from those non-renewed licenses, and flat at this time of year is a cautiously optimistic sign. I think this harvest is going to get consumed, and there's not going to be another Croptober 2 weeks later or anything like that. So we should see at least firmness and maybe some slight upward pressure on pricing as the market comes looking for more supply.
And so you mentioned it, but I've been kind of following. We've seen over 23 million square feet of licensed capacity not renew since the peak of like 82 million. We're at 59 million square feet. You've pointed out to me that there is, and I keep track of it now, I want to say it's like 27 or 28% are still provisional licenses, which I believe can no longer be renewed. What are you expecting? And that's still 15 to 16 million square feet of the remaining 59. What is your expectation of what will happen with those provisional licenses, or where we may end up in terms of total licensed capacity?
Yeah, I think it's pretty unequivocal. Unless they have a regulatory change, which I don't see maybe even being possible on the time frame that would be required in a provisional license can no longer be renewed to an annual. I'm pretty, I'm dubious that many of these provisionals will be able to make it over the hump, especially in this kind of pricing climate. The incentive and the what makes sense to do to get there moves up and down with the price of a pound. And I think for operators like us, the pricing that we're seeing works just fine. But for lots of operators out there, it's a not particularly enticing environment. So I continue to believe that we're going to see a number of these provisional licenses time out and go away.
That's great. And just a thought, I mean, like if most of those go away and you just have some other natural attrition, I mean, it's very possible we'll be down 50% from the peak when all this shakes out, which is just incredible, like 40 million square feet of cultivation. What are your thoughts? I mean, we've mentioned about the Croptober, doesn't appear like it's any massive big wave. You're coming on with further supply. How do you guys see, and maybe this is a question for Mark, like how are you modeling pricing for next year? How are you thinking about pricing?
So I think we finally this year started to get a better sense of what a normal pricing environment looks like. If you go 2021 and parts of 22, right, you could have crazy gyrations and very large moves. So I think, I'm going to just use flower because that's the best frame of reference, right? We're saying, at the highest price in Q2, we were between $750 and $800 per pound of flower. The prices improved steadily from January into Q2. And that's, I think, largely a function of there's less supply in the market. Your outdoor guys are not in the market. You're low light for mixed light greenhouses. So production is just naturally low. And then during the course of the end of June through the next, I'm going to say through September, we saw prices move down to around, a $600 per pound range. And over the last couple of weeks, they firmed as we're moving through Croptober. And so our thought is for next year, we'll see the same kind of pattern we saw this year. Prices should improve as we exit the year, as the supply leaves the market. And we're expecting them to peak again in the second quarter of next year and follow the same pattern. We're putting some conservatism in our view for next year relative to where prices go, just to be on the safe side, but nothing crazy. So we're assuming this year's pattern kind of repeats itself. And part of it is we think, again, the big loss of cultivators, that's already happened. And we'll still see some losses, but they'll be at a lower pace. So the operators that are in the market now are the ones who are better operators, otherwise they wouldn't be around.
Gotcha. That's helpful. There was a disclosure, I think, in your filing that there was one customer's a significant portion. I want to say it was like 27% of revenue. I think that's the right number. I got a question about this from someone. What kind of risk do you see with the concentration, and can you just discuss that?
You want to take that? I can. So, I mean, so the structure there, it's more like a contract grow agreement, where we're growing for that customer genetics and then selling them back to them. I think we're in a safe position because we hold most of the inventory most of the time. Mark's a pretty tight guy when it comes to credit limits and exposure. So at any one point, I don't think we're too far over the skis on that. And frankly, if you ask our salespeople if they want to sell that product themselves directly, I think they'd jump up and down with a smile on their face. So I don't think it doesn't put us in much of a position where we're on the wrong side of the trade.
So I think building on Graham's point. So we've been doing business with this customer for a while. I don't remember the start date. We have very manageable terms with them, and we watch the relationship very closely. And the few times they have been a day or two late, we've said we're not going to give you new product until you pay, right? And we're really disciplined on managing the AR. And if you do look at our AR balances on our balance sheet, right, which now includes our own CPG business, they really haven't gone up. So we manage that very closely. And if something, particularly in this instance, if something happened with the relationship, the amount of AR risk has not been substantial. So I'm comfortable with the relationship we have, and again, they've been good partners. They've generally paid 90% plus on time, so we've had no issues with them at all.
Okay, great. That is helpful. Do you see I want to say earlier this year, cannabis is like dog years. It's like 7 years. But there was a kerfluffle, I'll describe, where there was an issue with your loan or a compliance issue, and people freaked out. Oh my God, Glass House is going bankrupt. They violated a covenant, whatever. We talked about that on a previous call. I had a question. Do you see any issues or potential problems with the compliance with your loan in 2024?
I think the best way to answer that is to say, we work closely with our lender, Whitehawk. They came well introduced by some good friends of mine. And while they're a lender, and they have their rules, we're not anticipating any real issues with them. Again, we've worked well with them. Even the kind of kerfuffle was, nice handshake and worked out. So I would just say I think they're pretty darn happy with the performance of the loan, and all is good.
And now you're paying it off. Now you're starting to pay off actual principal payments.
Yeah, they'll have $7 more million to loan soon enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and look, I check in and I talk to him all the time. Mark checks in with one of their guys, every couple of weeks or so. So I think it's just smart, especially in this crazy climate out here, to keep your friends close, and we do.
Gotcha. That's great. I had a bunch of questions about this, and we've talked about it before. But your Camarillo greenhouse is so fantastic. You have 2 Carpinteria greenhouses, which are fine, right? But they're not the Ferrari, and they're sitting on what appears to be valuable land. We've talked about, you've thought about, like, hey, what do we do with these greenhouses? Do you have any long-term plans? Is there a potential to sell them that could help fund some of the growth, or what do you think you're going to do with them?
So that's a great question, and we get asked that all the time. I would say this: right now, we're really focused in on the Ferrari. We still derive income and revenue from those 2 farms, and they are certainly not a Ferrari, but they're good, strong Ford Mustangs. And I think in the next couple of years, we're going to be watching, as interstate commerce maybe looms around and gets a little closer. I think you might find a lot of California greenhouse facilities become more valuable. And so for us, I think when it comes down to it, to say, certainly our Padero property could be turned into houses. It's quite a process in California, especially Santa Barbara. But we could certainly sell that to a developer when that makes sense. Right now, the real estate market's a little bit iffy, but we think
it helps when Kevin Costner's your neighbor, right?
It does. But the other thing is, something to remember is, if you have a Ferrari, you might say, hey, if there's any part of the farm that totals around 500,000 square feet, that you are not doing Ferrari-like things, but you could actually offset to one of those, either or both of those farms, there might be a good argument to look at doing that, so that we use as much of Camarillo as we can to go full speed. So we're still in flux. We don't really feel we need to make a decision right now. They are collateral for our loan. So there's that. We would, money would probably go back to our lender first. So at this point, I think we're just sort of kicking the can. We really like our assets. We're pretty lucky. We just sort of go around the monopoly board and just sort of enjoy having them right now.
Gotcha. You brought up interstate commerce. I think we're all waiting. In January, we heard from the California Cannabis Department, that sent a letter to California Attorney General Rob Bonta. We haven't heard from Rob. Maybe it's before the end of the year, maybe not. I hear there may be some people or the governor or a couple governors working together to potentially ask Merrick Garland for states to enter interstate commerce. I'm just curious what you guys are hearing or thoughts on interstate commerce, obviously being the big value unlock for Glass House.
So there's two things. One, you've got Gavin Newsom, who, even though he's denying it, is doing California business in China, Middle East, running around APEC, all that kind of good stuff. I believe he is, from everything that I'm seeing, it looks like he is trying to put himself on the world stage so that should things shake out a little differently in the next few months, he could put himself in a position to be candidate for President Newsom. And some people are going to, it's ridiculous. I'm not sure how someone would take what I'm saying, just watch his actions. But when you're trying to be more than just the California governor, which he clearly is, wouldn't this actually show that he can work with other states, that he can work in spite of difficult laws? So it fits the narrative. Rob Bonta is a very pro-cannabis attorney general, and he was when he was in the assembly. So we're hearing there's rumblings. We're talking to a lobbyist who you introduced us to, thankfully, about helping him carry that torch. And then we haven't put out a press release yet. We're studying, but some MSOs hired a guy named David Boyce, who's a very famous attorney for taking things to the Supreme Court. And at least at our initial reading right now, we're having lawyers really talk about it and look at it. It appears that they are trying, these are MSOs that have put some small companies in front. And it appears that the real main reason for this is to see if they can get the Supreme Court to overturn the Commerce Clause in regards to interstate commerce. We hope that's not the case. We know that's not good for the consumer. We know that's not good for the small farmer, the businessman, and mainly the planet. And it would perpetuate a broken system that we have now, only to protect those who would fund this lawsuits, investments during this broken time. And so we are going to, I highly anticipate that we will put our findings and our thoughts on paper and start holding our elected leaders accountable, because you can't talk about climate change when you're forcing people to grow an agriculture product inside of a warehouse using largely coal-fired electricity. It makes no sense. And to boot, you're going to force consumers to buy things that cost $800 a pound to grow in these Franken warehouses and forego good ag from farmers in California, Oregon, and Washington largely. So we're watching that. We hope that we don't see some large cannabis companies do some Dr. Evil kind of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, the stat that always gets me is that 10% of Massachusetts energy grid is used for cannabis cultivation, which is totally insane.
And if Elizabeth Warren doesn't call it out, and she's one of the staunchest supporters of that Green New Deal, if she doesn't call it out and she continues to perpetuate this, then I would watch her actions and ignore her words.
Well, Kyle, last question is, can you give us any update on your prison reform and your work trying to help get nonviolent prisoners in cannabis out of jail?
So number one, thank you for asking that, Aaron. I really appreciate it. I wish it was asked in every single interview to every single C-suite. in cannabis right now, because we're sitting here earning livings, raising investor capital, selling, we'll sell north of $160 million worth of cannabis this year. And of the almost 3,000 people that are sitting in these federal cages, suffering as we do this, it's unspeakably immoral. And so in November 1st, there was a First Step Act that took effect. And we have to be very careful how we write these compassionate release. Like for Parker Coleman, it would be devastating if we won and only got 20 years knocked off his remaining 29, 50 years or 49 years. It would still be a life sentence. So we're working with counsel. We're talking to some of the folks we use, and I'm pretty shameless, hitting up all my friends that are lawyers to see if I can get some pro bono work to help the great work of Weldon Angelos and Mission Green and Professor Eric Luna to try and go that route. At the same time, we are pushing our federal leaders. I will say this, I don't know Hunter Biden. I don't have anything against the man personally, but him being indicted puts his dad in a very interesting juxtaposition. And I talk about this with cannabis prisoners because they're saying, we hope he gets prosecuted and gets the same treatment we did, because we think his party and both parties will say, Joe, if you're going to pardon your son, which any dad, we're all dads, I think I would be thinking the same thing. Hopefully it wakes you up where someone goes, hey, Joe, why you got that pen out for little Hunter? What about these folks? Certainly cannabis. I won't even go down the road of, I think we should be doing that for a lot of people that are POWs from the drug war. But I appreciate you asking the question. I will tell you from talking to Parker and talking to Ali on the phone, and now there's another one named Jerry Heyman who's up in Lompoc. He's from Fresno. His is just as crazy egregious. When I talk to these gentlemen on the phone, there's just utter frustration, and we need to make them Luke Scaramazos and get them out. That's what we need. So thanks for asking the question, and I'm hopeful, but I need President Biden to wake up.
Use that pen. Let some people out.
Yeah. Well, hopefully. Listen, thank you so much, guys. This has been great as usual. I've learned a lot. Always learn a lot. I'm looking forward to the next time we do this, which I guess will be March. You get some time.
We go
maybe
a year end. We go toward the end of March, because you got to go through all the audit procedures and make sure the audit is fully completed. So it'll be a little longer between discussions with you, Aaron, as it relates to.
But I'm guessing there could be quite a bit of news.
Yes,
cannabis related in between that
Aaron,
period.
We won't be talking about college football. We'll not be talking about March Madness, and I will tell you, myself and every USC Trojan is really excited about this basketball season that's already underway. We've already turned the page, my friend.
Nice. That's great. Well, thank you so much, guys. This has been awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us as always, Aaron.
Thank you.
thank you, Aaron.